Today we're going to talk about the operating track controller. What the OTC does for you is it gives you the ability to use your TMCC Cab 1 or Legacy remote to activate either 4 uncoupling sections or 2 operating uncoupling tracks. Now, an operating uncoupling track is something that has an electromagnet in the center to uncouple the cars, and it has the 4 accessory rails which activate the slide shoes on special animated cars such as milk cars, barrel cars, twin bay dump cars, etc. So these devices, these operating uncoupling tracks, they come with their own controllers, and you can continue to use those controllers in a conventional manner, meaning you walk over to the controller, press the button, or you can choose to operate them off your Legacy remote or your Cab 1. The OTC, much similar to the ASC or AMC or that whole series of devices, has a support end, support side, and a business side. The support side is the DAT and COM. This is the data in the common. This is a red wire and a green wire from something such as the command base cable. This is the cable that connects to the computer port on your command base and then provides the DAT and COM, which is the serial communication line to the OTC. Red would come in here and come out of here and go to the next device. Green would come into COM, come out and go to the next device in a daisy chain fashion. The other end of the support side is the power. We have A and U. The OTC needs a 14 volt AC fixed supply to operate. It's important to note that the power that you use to power the OTC must be separate from the power that you use up here on the business end. You don't want to tie your operating tracks and the OTC together. You want the OTC to operate on its own independent power supply. So we've got A is AC hot, U is AC ground. This A is connected here, this U is connected there. They're connected internally to give you the opportunity to use a heavier gauge wire to bring power into A and U, take power out to the next device, and so on through all the other OTC, ASC style devices. Let's talk about the business end. The business end of the OTC has 2 labels on it. OPR for operating track, which means that this first block of 4 positions is for accessory 1. The second block of 1 through 4 is for accessory 2. These are the 4 connections used to connect your operating track. And we'll show you how to connect an O-gauge or O27 operating uncoupling track as well as a fast track operating uncoupling track to your OTC. The lower section is for uncoupling tracks only. These would just be the electromagnets in the rail that allow you to manually, or not manually, but to uncouple the freight cars without actually reaching over and pushing the plunger. And the way that it works on the uncoupler section, or uncoupler side, is when you're controlling uncouplers, you can control 4 of them. You've got 1 and 2 for accessory 1, 1 and 2 for accessory 2, accessory 3, and accessory 4. Both uncoupling tracks, uncoupling and operating tracks, and uncoupling tracks are addressed as accessories. Not switches, not engines, but accessories. So you can select whether you want to control operating tracks or uncoupling tracks through programming of the OTC. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. So to clarify the top of the OTC, we've got operating tracks, 2 blocks of 4 positions, and uncoupling tracks, 4 blocks of 2 positions. Earlier we talked about programming your OTC. There's 2 styles of operation with an operating track controller. You can select to operate it as a operating track controller where you only have 2 outputs for operating uncoupling tracks such as this, or you can operate it where you have 4 outputs, which is effectively 4 uncoupling track only. To set which one is which, we need to program it. Before we get there, I just want to point out that I've got power and ground on this transformer, providing power to the backside or the support end of the ASC and the OTC, and it's daisy chained over to the AMC. So I've got a fixed 14 volt AC supply coming into my OTC. I then have another accessory transformer which I'm using to control the power to the operating track. I also have my data connection, or my communication cable, that goes from my ASC, and it's daisy chained to the OTC, daisy chained to the AMC. This ultimately goes back and connects to the computer port on my legacy or TMCC1 command base. So all of this is pre-wired for us. What I've got here is a Lionel operating uncoupling track, which we'll get to in a second. So let's program this. Since we have an operating uncoupling track connected to the OTC already, we want to program it. We need to tell the OTC that it's going to be operating uncoupling tracks. So it's only going to have two ID numbers to it, accessory 1, accessory 2. The next one would be accessory 2 or 3 and 4, and so on. To do this, we apply power to the device, which we have power on. We remove our programming jumper. Using our legacy remote, we're going to press accessory 9, 8, and set. Now the LED on the back of the OTC comes on for 1 second to confirm that it's taken the command. Now we need to assign the address for the OTC. So we press accessory 1 and set. Now by pressing accessory 98 set, I've told the OTC that I'm using it as an operating uncoupling track controller. So it only has two addresses in it. And by pressing accessory 1 and set, I've set it up for accessory 1 and accessory 2. Now we can place the jumper back on the OTC. And from this point forward, it'll continue to operate as accessory 1 and accessory 2. We have a fast track operating uncoupling track here. I also have another one behind it. The reason that I want to point this out is because the fast track operating uncoupling tracks out of the box, if you follow the wiring instructions that come in the manual for the operating track controller, it will not work properly. It's a little bit of special wiring required, and it's really hard to try and draw this out, so I'm going to make this as simple as possible. We take an operating uncoupling track, fast track operating uncoupling track out of the box. It's the easiest thing to do is just locate the 4-pin ribbon cable that goes to the control and simply unplug each and every one of the 4 wires. There's a blue, a black, a green, and a red lead, and take them out of the equation entirely. Now, it's entirely up to you if you want to reuse this ribbon cable or save it on the controller. What we've done here is we've reused the connectors. I want to point out to you a couple things that need to be done to make this fast track operating uncoupling track operate properly. So I'm going to configure the 2 tracks so they're both sitting the same. What I've done is I've color coded in blue these 4, 5, 6 sets of terminals here. These terminals that are in blue represent those operating rails that sit in between the 3 rails. What's going to happen is your accessory rails are going to get AC hot power when you press aux 2 on the legacy remote. And the coil, the electromagnet here, is going to energize when you press aux 1. But there's 2 modifications that need to be made. Number 1, the coil is currently wired to the outside rail and to 1 activation rail. What you need to do is cut the wire that goes to the activation rail. You can see here that we've already cut it and spliced it into a wire. So that wire there needs to be cut out entirely, like so. You can pull the insulation off of there, it's just a small piece. This copper wire has very thin protective coating on it that will prevent it from shorting out. So you need to use like a razor blade or an X-Acto knife to shave that coating off the end of the wire. You're going to connect this wire to 1 wire from the I use the flat cable from the controller just for ease, or however you want to put it, convenience. So shave the protective coating off the end of the wire and solder it to another wire. That is ultimately going to come back and connect to the OTC. And I'll explain all these connections in just a moment. The other modification you need to make is we're going to take two wires. One is going to connect to this pin right here on our control rails, and the other one is going to connect to the pin on this control rail. You can see I've got the blue terminal and the green terminal connected there. At the end of the day, I'm going to end up with three wires under my fast track operating uncoupling track. One that connects to the positive side of my electromagnetic coil, and two that connect to the control rails that sit in between the three rails. This green wire connects to both operating rails here, or activation rails, and the blue terminal connects to this rail, which ultimately comes up and jumps over to the other operating rail. So I've got a wire to each set of operating rails and one wire to the coil on my coil, or my electromagnet. Those three wires come back to my OTC. Basically what I have on the numbers here on the top, I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the number 4 slot, I'm taking AC hot. That's AC hot, not ground. I'm taking hot from my accessory transformer. The blue wire comes across and inserts into the number 4 position. The number 3 position comes out to the blue wire, or the accessory activation rails. The number 2 position goes to my coil, my electromagnet here in the middle, and number 1 comes to the green wire on the accessory rail. So number 1 and number 3 connect to my activation rails, number 2 connects to my coil, and number 4 connects to AC hot on my transformer. The blog page that we have to follow up this presentation will have this wiring diagram to make it a little bit easier for you as well if this is difficult to follow. At the end of the day, the only other wire that I have to add to the equation is AC ground. Now, assuming that my accessory transformer that I'm using to provide the AC hot to my OTC is in phase with my other transformers that are powering the track, I can introduce ground to the outside rail through those other transformers. Since we don't have that set up here, I'm going to use these gator clips to take ground from my accessory transformer, and I'm going to put it to the outside rail of the fast track. This represents the ground I'm getting through my track transformers that are in phase with my accessory power. Now I have my accessory power now set to about 14 volts AC. The transformer that's powering my devices here is set to 14 volts. I'm going to use this barrel car, which has slide shoes on the trucks that will activate on the activation rails, and it also has the plunger for the coupler. I'll be able to show you the electromagnet. So place the car on the track. Using my remote, I'm going to press accessory 1. The aux 1 key, or straight arrow key, will activate my electromagnet. As long as I hold down aux 1, the magnet is energized. Now, I'm going to press aux 2. Aux 2 will not activate my electromagnet at all, but it does energize my accessory rails to activate the car. Now this barrel car just buzzes it creates a vibration to work the barrels up the ramp. So I'm going to go ahead and press aux 2 and you'll hear the car running. This trough in here is vibrating because the shoes on those activation rails are now getting power. When I let off aux 2, the power turns off. Repeat this process for other fast track operating uncoupling tracks in the accessory 2 position, and all your fast track operating uncoupling tracks will work the same through the OTC. We're going to take a moment now and show you how to connect an O gauge operating uncoupling track to the OTC. So we've got a Lionel O-gauge operating uncoupling track, and we're going to connect that to our operating track controller. We did a little bit of research on this, and we found that when you activate, if you leave it wired as it is from the factory and you press aux1 on the remote, what you're actually doing is you're energizing the coil, but you're also energizing one set of the accessory rails. So what we did is we made a slight modification. On the back side of the operating uncoupling track, we took the wire for the electromagnet that's soldered to what's labeled as the number 2 position, and we clipped it off of there and we soldered it to its own separate wire. What this will do for us is when we press aux1 on the remote, only the electromagnet will energize and not the accessory rails. Then when we come back and press aux2, only the accessory rails will fire and not the electromagnet. Personally, I think that that's a better option to go. You can wire it per the instruction manual if you choose, but for this demonstration, we've got a separate wire for the electromagnet, and then 2 wires out here on our activation rails, which the number 4 position is this side, and the number 2 position is this side. So very much similar to our fast track operating uncoupling section. We've got 4 sections on the OTC that we'll be using. And they're labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. What we're going to do is we're going to put AC hot from our accessory transformer into the number 4 position. Into the number 2 position will go the hot wire for the electromagnet, which, if you give me just a moment here, this flat cable is a little elusive. It'll be here that it goes into the number 2 slot again for the electromagnet. And then the number 2 and the number 4 positions out on the uncoupling track will go into positions 1 and 3. And what will happen again is when we press aux1, we'll have the electromagnet. aux2 will be our accessory activation rails. Now, to complete our circuit, we still need AC ground. Assuming that our accessory transformer is in phase with our track power supplies, we'll be able to use the ground provided by the track power transformers. But for this demonstration, we're going to have to use the accessory transformer ground to put ground out on the rails. We apply 14 volts of power to ground to the track and AC hot into our OTC. We're using, again, an operating uncoupling track. So let's go ahead and program it one more time. Take the jumper off. We're going to press accessory 98 and set. Then accessory 1 set. That first step where we programmed it as accessory 98, that told the OTC that we're operating the operating uncoupling tracks and that it should have 2 single digit addresses, can have 2 double digit addresses, but at the end of the day it's still only 2 devices that this device is going to control. So now we'll bring our operating car into the equation. I press the aux1 key, I get the electromagnet, place the car in position, I press aux2, and the barrel ramp is vibrating to move the barrels up the ramp. And I'll be quiet so you can hear that. Now, you'll notice that when we press aux2, nothing's happening on our electromagnet until we press aux1. So, if you wire it per the manual, when you press aux2 to animate the car, the electromagnet will actually energize. Whereas if you rewire the coil, or just basically take that single wire from the electromagnet off of where it's currently soldered to into its own separate wire, run it back into the number 2 slot on the OTC, only the electromagnet will fire when you press aux1, and only the accessory rails will activate when you press aux2. If you have any questions, make sure that you see our blog site. it'll have the wiring diagram for this as well. We're going to now connect just a regular uncoupling track to our OTC. The wiring on this is very different from what it is for the operating uncoupling tracks. So very basic. There's only really 2 wires involved in the equation. On the underside of our fast track uncoupling section, we have 2 terminals, red and black, and they go to our uncouple button. What we're going to do is we're going to take the red wire off of the pin to the center rail. We're then going to take our electromagnet, which is black, and leave that in place. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and strip this wire back. So we really only need 1 connection under the track, and that would be the electromagnet itself. We'll strip this back, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut this for convenience. We no longer will need this uncouple button since we're going to control this with command control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and strip the end. And again, this is the wire that's connected to my electromagnet here on the underside with this black terminal. I'm going to connect this to the number 1 position. On the OTC, the front side says OPR, numbered 1 through 4. The back side says UNC for uncouple, and it's labeled 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So 1 is 1 slot, 2 is the second slot. This is basically acting as a switch, an on-off switch. So I'm going to take number 1, or I'm going to take the wire from my coil and connect it to number 1. Now I'm going to take a hot lead from my accessory transformer, which is a fixed 14-volt supply, and I'm going to connect it to the number 2 position. It's as simple as that. Now, ground for my uncoupling track will come from the ground on my track power supply, and assuming of course that your accessory power source is in phase with your track power source, we can use the ground from the track power to complete the circuit to our coil, and the fixed 14 volt hot from our accessory transformer, so that when we energize the coil, runs at 14 volts. So to replicate that ground, I'm going to bring in my quick connects here and just take ground from my accessory transformer out to ground on my track. I now need to tell my OTC that I'm going to run just an uncoupling track. So to do this, I've got 14 volts on my OTC power source. I have 14 volts out on my accessory fixed supply. I'm going to remove the jumper. Using my legacy remote, I'm going to press accessory 99 and set. That now tells the OTC that it's going to control uncoupling tracks and not operating uncoupling tracks. So now it will accept 4 addresses instead of 2. So once again, it's accessory 99 set. The LED here in the back comes on. Now I'm going to tell it I want to start with accessory 1, so I go accessory 1 set. Replace the jumper. Now what I've done is I have assigned accessory 1, 2, 3, and 4 to my OTC. So just using this screwdriver so you can see for the effect, I press accessory 1 and the aux 1 key. And as long as I hold down aux 1, my uncoupling magnet will energize. Grab that card again to show you. So I press down aux 1, I let off aux 1, and my electromagnet turns off. So using an OTC, I can control up to 4 of these uncoupling sections. This way, if I've got uncoupling tracks that are further in the layout, I can access them remotely through my legacy remote or my cab 1. And that wraps up the presentation on the operating track controller. Once again, there is a blog page that talks about everything that we've discussed here in the video with color-coded diagrams to show you how to hook up the operating tracks and the uncoupling tracks. Thank you.